Now is the time for us all to hear the truth, and thank you all for coming on the journey with us.
Aboriginal people are the most incarcerated peoples in the world. They are overrepresented within the criminal justice system, both within juvenile detention and adult prisons.
The Indigenous population experience higher rates of infant mortality. Indigenous women also experience approximately double the level of maternal mortality.
Still today, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are more susceptible to poorer health outcomes.
First Nations children are overrepresented within the child safety system.
Indigenous girls born in Australia between 2010 and 2012 can expect to live 10 years less than non-Indigenous girls of the same year.
The gap for men is even larger.
In 2015, the Indigenous suicide rate was double that of the general population, despite making up only 3% of the total population.
Indigenous children were 10 times more likely to be placed in out-of-home care than non-Indigenous children up until 2016.
It wasn't that long ago that our mob were not allowed to speak their language.
It wasn't long ago that Aboriginal people were forcibly removed from their parents under government policy.
It was not long ago that Aboriginal people were separated from their children.
It was not long ago that blackfellas were not allowed to be in public areas without permission.
It wasn't that long ago that Aboriginal people were barred from schools and hospitals.
It wasn't that long ago that Aboriginal people were forced to work in the homes of non-Indigenous people and had their earnings permanently withheld by the government.
With my voice, I promise to share the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about our people.
With my voice, I promise to share the truth, the whole truth about our country's history.
I promise to share the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about our land.
With my voice, I promise to share the whole truth about our culture.
I promise to share the whole truth and nothing but the truth about our people's language.
With my voice, I share the truth, the whole truth about my story, a survivor of the stolen generation.
We've had the apology, but without change, it's just manipulation.
With the memories I hold of my beautiful mother, I too will find the strength and fight for what is right.
I think that Australians all over Australia have got to decide whether or not they think it's right that Macquarie Street, for example, should be owned by the Aborigines. Lord Vestey, 1972. The ones that are no good to themselves and can't accept things, the half-castes, and this is where most of the trouble comes. I would dope the water up so that they were sterile and would breed themselves out in future, and that would solve the problem. Lane Hancock, 1984. Tomorrow I want you all to bring a cake of soap to class and we will wash the little black kids, because they smell, don't they, children? Bundaberg East State School, Grade 1, 1966. You know, Robert, I think that Aboriginals really need to get over the past and start to focus on a better future. You know, you can't dwell on the past. Bundaberg, 30th of August, 2019. These are real examples of language that was used in the perseverance of assimilation, and it has contributed towards successful deconstruction of what is the oldest continuing culture in the world. Once upon a time, our mob would inherit cultural knowledge from their old people. This knowledge was complex, vital for survival, and would guide us through our lives. Today, if we're lucky, we can inherit this knowledge. However, mostly we inherit the intergenerational trauma passed down through our parents, our grandparents, and our old people before them. So why is my mob still here today? Why am I alive? And what is it that we are getting over? Well, the European perspective of history will even tell you, very start, the doctrine of terra nullius, a Latinized term, of course meaning land belonging to no one. Now this was declared in 1770, before invasion. After that, invasion of 1788. Now I'll use the term invasion for this presentation, and I'll explain why as we go on. Then 1 year later, 1789, we're introduced to our first form of biological warfare when smallpox was introduced. Now we move on to Aborigines, a pseudoscientific Latinized terminology that's been around since the 16th century, the basis of which established the myth of homogeneity, all the same, belonging to one, or in recent history known as the blacks, or for example, the Bundaberg blacks. Well, we know that there are over 250 language groups across this vast continent, splitting up into over 700 dialects of those languages. So I stand before you today not as an Aborigine or a Bundaberg black, but I stand before you as a Gurang Gurang and Tarabalang man. We move on to the Flora and Fauna Act, which some believe concluded at the 1967 referendum. Also, there's the Protection Act of 1869 through to 1969. The Stolen Generation, 1910 until 1970. The White Australia Policy from 1949 to 1973. And of course, the continuing massacres and genocide. I'd like to share with you the Uncle Ernie Grant Holistic Planning Framework. Now, I'd like to particularly acknowledge Zona Hussey-Smith, who had the opportunity to work very closely with Uncle Ernie at the time that this was embedded into Education Queensland. And so she was able to relay this to me with great clarity. So I thank her. And it's quite relevant today, and even only last week I was embedding it in a classroom. So I'll tell you how it works. 6 elements that we can position at the very core of our forward planning. 6 elements that will assist us to authentically intertwine Indigenous perspectives back into our lives. But why these 6? Well, before colonisation or invasion, we had our land, our people had language, their culture, sense of time, place and relationships. Well, after invasion, we lost our land, our language, our culture, our people lost their sense of place and relationships, and therefore leaving us with only a sense of time. With this simple yet effective framework at heart, we can then begin to reclaim what was our cultural identity. I'd like to share with you an important quote, a quote by Ruth Hopkins. "Every native born into this world is a victory against colonialism and attempted genocide. You are the resistance. You are the hope made flesh." This is why I do what I do. This is why I educate and push to make things right. Our people have survived for over 80,000 years successfully, but how did we survive the hardest part, the past 231 years, with the odds systematically stacked up against us? Well, 3 core values remained with our people. These 3 core values were resilience, adaptability, and belonging. And this is why I can stand before you today. Our people never lost their sense of belonging, even though they were displaced across country. I would now like to share with you a quote from a very inspirational woman, my grandmother. She was a very wise woman, and she taught herself a lot of what she knew. She taught herself to read and to write. And at year 3, she was kicked out of school, denied education any further, because the idea then was that you couldn't teach the black kids past year 3. So she taught herself. And she said, "Indeed, some of our people are still going through it, being made to feel an alien in our land. On the other side, I feel an overall sense of pride and love for my people, in that they never taught us bitterness, only love. The ones that came through it still had the caring and sharing attitude and had passed it on to their children. I feel this is why my people have survived. They have not let themselves be eaten up with hate. The bitterness would have destroyed them all." It was clear that this hate and bitterness was beyond our people's dignity, and it would be so easy to be consumed with that. So the language I've chosen for this presentation is purposeful. I choose these words as they are clear and I feel appropriate to my cause, but I want to reiterate that this is not about taking the blame for our country's history, nor is it about showing sympathy or taking pity on our people across the past 231 years. That feels better. Rather, it's about creating a platform for us to think differently and for us to guide us to research further beyond what we were taught at school. Now look at the word invasion. It's clear and concise and quite representative of the first encounter. Now from the European perspective, of course, it was colonisation, and there's no doubt that was what they set out to do. But no one told our blackfellas that. This is not a divisive word, and please do not label it as such. Rather, this is a word that, if commonly used, it has the potential to start intellectual conversations and create positive change. The substitute for this word, of course, is settlement. Never in our 231 years do I feel we have been settled. We are the only Commonwealth country without a treaty, a formal treaty. So what does this mean? Without that formal agreement, our land was never ceded. And we must remember, even my Scottish and Italian ancestry and heritage today still remains a guest on this country. Language is the basis for how we communicate today, and of course thousands of years ago. What comes out of your mouth is important. You have the power to ruin someone's day or turn a bad day into good. Think about the language we are willing to use today, compare it with examples from history, and then set your trajectory for this inclusive future that we all envision when we talk about reconciliation. Now, true and proper reconciliation. It's time to get serious about this. It's not just a word, and it's certainly not just a week in the year. We will not achieve this when we are not willing to seek a full education regarding our country's history. There are no more excuses for ignorance in 2019, not on the 30th of August, and not today. An unbiased perspective of our history was not afforded to me through our curriculum when I went to school. I had to seek this later, and I'm very grateful that I can now go back into the classrooms in a modern time and give a good perspective, give the both lens. So if I can do it, so can you. I would like to finally finish with a quote from a very special Indigenous man, an inspirational man, and I'm very lucky to be able to call him not only an uncle, but a mentor of mine. To understand our present, we must understand our past, from Uncle Grant Sarah. Now, only then can we consider with a clear view of what our future may look like. Our perspective up until now is from a westernised lens. Now, all that is left to do is to view our history from our lens, and then we can move forward together. Ngalan. Yin ngai nga. Bundabara ngalan jaru. You and I, all of us together, belonging here to Bundaberg country. So research unbiased Aboriginal history. Learn from the success of our people, of the oldest continuing living culture, and allow yourselves to be empowered by our sustainability. Allow that knowledge to guide you and those close to you on that shared journey forward for an inclusive future. Research before reconciliation, and it all starts with acknowledgement. We are ready to make these wrongs right. We are ready to reconcile proper. But Australia, are you? Yina galangyo. Thank you.